much for joining us. Pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move over to Europe with our next story, where the Kremlin has strongly rejected the European Union's plans to accelerate the phase-out of Russian energy, saying sanctions will not force Russia to change course. The Russian government maintains that it is unaffected by the sanctions and continues to defend its interests. On the topic of the United Nations Security Council, the Kremlin expressed support for reform, though it acknowledged that reaching consensus is nearly impossible, given the conflicting positions of many nations. Additionally, the Kremlin responded to Trump's warning of further sanctions, emphasizing Russia's openness to resolving the Ukraine conflict through diplomacy. We are now joined by Keith Vaz, who is a former UK minister, and he joins us live from London. Keith, thank you very much for joining us. Good afternoon from Delhi. And the Kremlin insists that sanctions will not change its course. How sustainable is this defiance, given the EU's accelerating push away from Russian energy?
Good morning from London. The situation remains that sanctions have been perpetrated against the Russians for a number of years, but Russia is still there. And by all accounts, it seems to be thriving. So although there are threats coming from Ursula von der Leyen about packages of measures against the Russians, frankly, they don't really seem to have had much effect, because Europe and other countries are still dependent on Russian energy. If Russia stopped producing that energy, it would have an effect on the world markets. In other words, it would cost more for everyone. So far, there has been not that much change in the way in which the Russians have operated.
Yes, and do you think that Russia could realistically pivot to other markets like Asia, some say, you could also say it already has, fast enough to offset the EU's phase-out here?
Well, I'm sure they have done. I don't think they're waiting for Berlin or Paris or London, even though we're not in the EU, to make these decisions. I would imagine they've already got alternatives. They've got a very good and strong relationship, for example, with the with India, and there is no reason why that relationship should not continue, despite every efforts of the United States to try and stop this. The more the US does it, the more Russians continue to develop these relationships. We saw that very interesting meeting in Sochi. Russia was part of the meeting at Shanghai. So they're not hanging around waiting for the EU. They are finding other markets.
Yes, Keith, do stay with us. We have further updates from Europe. We now move on, where US President Donald Trump has formally begun